Welcome to the ANU Indonesia Project Global Seminar. My name is Arianto Patundru, and I would like to start by acknowledging and celebrating the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet and pay our respect to the elders past and present. We are grateful for the support from the Australian National University and also the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. In early January this year, Indonesia formally joined the BRICS, a group formed by Brazil, Russia, India, China, and later on South Africa. Indonesia is the latest addition to that group following Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. What are the benefits for Indonesia? How does it place us in the context of US-China economic tension? How will it affect our trade and investment flows? To discuss these questions, we have invited Dr. Lili Ing, a lead advisor for Southeast Asia region at the Economic Research Institute for ASEAN and East Asia or ERIA, and Dr. Krisna Gupta, a lecturer at Politeknik APP Jakarta and also Universitas Indonesia. Thank you, Lili and Krisna, for your time. As usual, we will have question and answer session after the talks. But if you want, you can write your question anytime on the Q&A box, not on the chat box. We will attend to them after the presentations or whenever I see fit. You can also ask verbally later on. And finally, please also kindly respond to the little polling on your screen because we need it to improve our series. Thank you. So without further ado, let me first invite Dr. Lili Ing to give her remarks. Thank you. Over to you, Ibu Lili.
Thank you so much, Dr. Patundru. Thank you, everyone, for having me. The reasons why I very much delighted to be part of these discussions is that I'm currently up to the point that whether I question myself, whether I read enough, whether I read data enough, whether I understand enough of this issue. Lately, I think like we have been very overwhelmed with this issue, and then the news that we read are really competing between the real news, fake news, written by human and written by AI. So I think like today discussions, let's be very honest, and I really want to learn from you, from colleagues from the ANU, and also from the participants. So in these sessions, we're gonna discuss about Indonesia economic cooperations, strategic engagements with major economies. Next. If we see over the last half century, say from the 1970 to recently, we see major transformations. Countries that used to be the major players in terms of economic and governance, now their power have been relinquished to emerging economies. Those countries, namely G7 countries, the US, Germany, UK, Canada, Japan, Italy, their power have been declining if we see in the four key metrics in economics: in total output, in trade in goods, in manufacturing value added, in foreign direct investments. And in these key four metrics in economics, their power have been taken over by emerging countries led by China, South Korea, India, as well as emerging countries in Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, Thailand, and lately Vietnam. Next, despite all these growing contributions from ASEAN countries in the world, there's always been a case that Indonesia has been always very stagnant in terms of increasing its value added. If we see over the last, from 1960 to recently. We see the harmonized tariff nomenclature at the 4-digit level. The story is not the story does not change so much for Indonesia's case. The top 20 exported products are dominated by natural resource intensive coal, steel, palm oil, ferroalloy, and if we extend up to 50 product lines, the story is also about natural resource intensive. So what's really going on with Indonesia compared to other emerging economies as well as other peer countries in the regions? We talk about the trade surplus in Indonesia, but if we see in terms of volumes, apparently Indonesia's exports volumes does not change much since 2018 until recent years. Next, also in terms of global value chains, I particularly highlight in the manufacturing sector, Indonesia is just the third from the bottom compared to other East Asian countries after New Zealand and Myanmar. That's we can see Indonesia. So both in terms of backward and forward linkages, Indonesia has been still left behind compared to other East Asian countries in the manufacturing value chains. Next. So I've always been asked, so what are actually Indonesia's potential sectors that have multiplier effects on long-term developments? This is something that I think Indonesia has been lacking behind in terms of designing long-term plan. What are sectors that can provide long-term benefits for Indonesia? And lately, if we see Indonesia's policy has been changing from presidents 1 to presidents 2, from minister 1 to minister 2, and then the changes is just happening in one night. So it's really create uncertainties. We are really lacking behind in terms of designing long-term plan. What we learn here is that these 5 sectors have long-term multiplier effects to supporting other sectors. One is shipping industry, second, railway, third, semiconductors and digital, fourth, seafood and fisheries products, 5, renewable energy. But the thing is that the growth of these sectors have been facing challenges. Next. And the challenges that we are facing right now is that how can Indonesia increase investments? If we always compare ourselves with China, during its peak development era, the ratio of foreign direct investment to GDP of China is always above 4%, right? But Indonesia has never achieved that level. Even in the last 2 years, I'm using Bank Indonesia, central bank data, because it records realized foreign direct investments, while the Ministry of Investments records approved investments. So I use the realized foreign direct investments. And we see the last 2 years, the ratio of foreign direct investments to GDP of Indonesia, it recorded 1.6% in 2023, and it recorded even 1.4% this year, because Indonesia recorded FDI of $22 billion in 2023, and it declined to $19 billion 2024. So this kind of, how can Indonesia increase investments? Even if we compare with Vietnam, see the last row, Vietnam has recording the same amount that when China has its peak, that's 4.3%. So how can Indonesia increase investments? That's something that we need to work together. The next challenge is that in the current rising geopolitical tensions, it's even very challenging. I'm gonna go through Trump administrations first, then I'm gonna go through OECD and BRICS later on. During Trump administrations, we're gonna face 4 extra specific challenges. The first one is the increased tariff rates, and Trump will gonna hit countries that have trade surpluses with the US. Of course, like China, Canada, Vietnam, Japan, South Korea. And also we need to keep in mind, Vietnam, Indonesia will be also in the line. Second one is generalized systems of preference. Indonesia received GSP to enter US market. We have the privilege to use GSP entering US markets. In 2023, our exports using GSP facility was recorded at 3.56 billion US dollar. Likewise, together with ASEAN countries, our exports to the US recorded 6.7 billion US dollar of ASEAN's export entering US market with GSP facilities. And remember, during the first Trump administrations, Trump was the first one to refuse GSP facilities for developing countries, which actually was not allowed by the Tokyo Agreement, but it was Trump who initiated the review and terminate some of GSP facilities to some of developing countries. The third one is global supply chains reorientations. And the fourth one that has also been very challenging for Indonesia related to my first point on how to increase investments. During Trump administrations, US will gonna provide a lot of subsidies to attract back US investments to domestic market. So I think Indonesia will face this challenging on how to increase FDI while we are facing dry capital market. The next one, please. Now it's always been a question that whether Indonesia should join OECD or BRICS. Joining OECD, I think the pros of joining OECD, first is that economic policy and international standard. I think being a member of OECD will provide Indonesia aligned with advanced economies and foster the adoptions of international standards, global best practices in governance, taxations, labor, environment, as well as economic policies in general. Development goals, I think it's going to support Indonesia's ambitions to transition to high-income economy by focusing sustainable developments, education, and infrastructure. But at the same time, we need to keep in mind, OECD is a rich club country. Being a member of OECD, that means we need to contribute significant amount for the secretariat, for joining it. Just even just to join OECD, it's gonna cost Indonesia a lot of resources in terms of money, human capital, and other policy adjustments. And the second one is that we need to question ourselves how much OECD will gonna listen to Indonesia. I think it's almost none. OECD is simply dominated by G7 countries, and they have long agenda of developed countries agenda. So how much OECD will gonna listen to Indonesia? How much OECD will gonna provide benefits for Indonesia? That's something that we need to ask ourselves. Second, how about joining? Next, please. How about joining BRICS? I think the pros is that it's very feasible that it's gonna strengthen economic ties, particularly on trade and investments. I learned that BRICS economies, they're very pragmatic in terms of providing platforms for like debt, dollar dependency, technology transfers, as well as on investments and infrastructure. Second, BRICS new development bank could also secure funding for infrastructure and sustainable development projects. That's the pros of being a member of BRICS. But there are also cons. First one is aligning with BRICS. As we probably know, we are currently under scrutiny what will be the Indonesia stance towards the US, towards our Western alliances. And it might also potentially affecting existing trade and investments relationship. The second one is internal divisions among BRICS. As we probably know that India has just recently make a very clear statements that India does not mean in any way to de-dollarize, and also like between those three main members of BRICS, China, India, Russia, I think they are politically and in terms of ways of developments might not be as solid as OECD economies, and they don't have a clear agenda in terms of long-term plan, what BRICS really want to do, and what are the policy targets that BRICS would like to achieve. So that's kind of pros and cons that we need to keep in mind. Next. So what will be the way forward? First, I think it really depends on Indonesia. First things first is, of course, we need to ensure macroeconomic stability. This is the first order conditions. Particularly, I want to highlight the third point on fiscal prudential. Next, on the consistency in policy, laws, and regulations, I think it's also, again, I would like to highlight that despite Indonesia being a member of OECD or BRICS, I think Indonesia should review the existing non-tariff measures of Indonesia, our local content requirements or TKDN, as well as foreign direct investments and domestic investments procedures and licensings. Because most of the time, we always heard that Indonesia's policies really hurting domestic players and really provide burdens for domestic players. How can we compete at the international market if we face domestic, like very high domestic costs in terms of licensings and procedures? Next. This is the long issues in terms of human capitals and technologies. I think we've been very much in line how we can improve skill and talents. And it's really sad lately we see the hashtag of kabur aja dulu, like many of the young Indonesia, they prefer to work and like overseas. And I think it's really a big slam for Indonesia's government. They need to really think seriously, how can Indonesia provide good jobs for good talents and skills? We cannot just say, oh, you can go wherever you want to go. I mean, those people are paying salaries of ministers, vice minister, and whoever they are in the government. So the government should really take care of young people, young talents, whoever they are, even though not only young talents, young skills, but I think all Indonesia's people, including those who are like people with needs, special needs, people with special assistance, like they are Indonesians people, and we all should be feeling responsible to take care of Indonesians. Next, this is the highlight on our discussion today on strategic engagements with major economies. I think if I'm asked whether Indonesia should join OECD or BRICS, I think Indonesia, as well as other Southeast Asian countries, we have been, and we always be very clear that we have never taken any sides. We are very neutral. We are peace promoter. We always want to have constructive and positive engagements, be with US, with Europe, Japan, South Korea, China, India, Palestine, and whatever countries that they're all our main trading and investment partners, and we treat them equally important. I think this is something that Indonesia and ASEAN should keep in mind, that we want to have this kind of positive engagements with all countries in the world. I think I'll stop here, and I'll be very much to have discussions with you. If you have any difficult questions, you can give it to Dr. Patundru or Dr. Gupta. You can give the easy ones for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ibu Lili. That was a very comprehensive and have so much food for thought. So let's just move on. For now, we have Dr. Krisna Gupta. So over to you, Dr. Gupta, for your presentation, and then after that, we will have the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Patundru and Dr. Ing. Of course, I grew up reading papers from both of you, so I feel so pleased to share a platform here. Lots of we had a lot of event in Indonesia talking about the economy. I think there was Michael Pattis in Monday and Danny Rodrik in Mandiri Investment Forum, and of course today there's Lili as well over at the Indonesian Economic Summit. Everyone talk about it, and BRICS, it came as a surprise, right? So I share your sentiment, Liliani. That is, it's pretty hard to talk anything at all about BRICS, right? So we'll be glad to share some discussions in this forum. But I will build a little bit more from what Dr. Ng mentioned on the plus and minus of BRICS. But here I want to focus a little bit on not just Indonesia, but of the hardship in general, like everything that happens quite very quickly. So I share Deb Elms had a share a panel with Dr. Lilian Ng, and she said everything moves so fast, so quickly. It is unprecedented, and now the government, all government, needs to move even faster, right? So the decision making needs to be even faster than this, and it's quite disheartening, right? Because we all know that democracy sometimes takes time, ASEAN takes time, and everything takes time. But yeah, let's see about BRICS. So this is very fast for Indonesian. Nobody really anticipated. Like the talk is there, but suddenly become one of BRICS plus. It's quite surprising. But the main reason is really from lots of things that I read is trying to find alternatives for Indonesia and the global South in general about a platform where it's not Western led. Right, but then I kind of want to raise a question: do Indonesia really needs to join BRICS to have this voice? And in the end, BRICS is a part of a bigger conversation because it's really the end of unipolar world. Sorry, pardon the typo. I will fix it later. And in the world like this, economists' voice is kind of should move aside to me, right? Because now we no longer make decisions based on economic efficiency, based on comparative advantage, dynamic efficiency. It's no longer the case. It's now I need to buy something from Trump's state, like the red state. I need to sell something to. I need to buy less from China. I need to. So now we speak more like a political people, right? Entity, and the prominence of the argument of security in politics now seems to trump economics. So this is why I put this in the slide, right? We need to move away a little bit, talk more, and less in decision-making process maybe. But to be a little bit more detailed, this is basically lots of argument that people forward on why Indonesia joined BRICS. The export market access, fairer global order in which Indonesia have more agency as a global South, alternative financing for development and agency, right? We need lots of investment in infrastructure, human development, stuff like that. Tapping the NDB, the new development bank that Dr. Ng just mentioned earlier. Alternatives to the dollar. People are a little bit scared being sanctioned these days after what happens in Russia. So it is warranted, right? It's in the interest of lots of countries to find alternatives to the system. And I think the last one is really where it packs a punch, where we need alternative source of technology to fight climate, provide food security, to arm our military. It's not a good strategy to just rely on one or two suppliers, stuff like this. So the last one is definitely not economics, right? Sometimes to get these goals, climate, food security, defense, we have to sort of let go of the economic efficiency a little bit. So I think the last one is probably have more merit. And I don't want to talk about it too much, right? I'm a newbie in terms of defense, especially. But let's pick apart one by one. But before we go, I want to share a little bit why not, right? Why it's not a good idea to join BRICS. Some arguments includes BRICS is very diverse. Like the only thing that unite us is like we don't really like the West to some extent, and we're not very, very rich. But apart from that, it's really different, right? Nobody thinks alike. So just like Dr. Lili and every panel earlier today mentioned about ASEAN, that is pretty different than countries. A BRICS is even, I think, a little bit more different than that, right? Some democracies, some's a little bit stronger, some's a one party system, etc. So when they talk, maybe we have more voice, but we probably will end up having less agreement among each other, which not really helpful if having a voice is what we want. Some of the previous arguments may not be true, right? Export and stuff like that. And even if it's true, maybe we can actually achieve it without joining the BRICS. And the next is, even if BRICS is not really useful or it doesn't really do anything, it doesn't matter to Trump, right? If you join BRICS, then it's against him, something like that. So he don't have to understand if BRICS matters or not. What he just understand is you guys are clubbing against me. And that's enough for him to do like a bad stuff to us. And lastly, out of the West into the dragon, are we really want to have our own voice, or we just have a different sort of power to voice us around? If that's the case, then having our own voice is not a good argument, right? We just don't like the previous voice. This new voice is probably a little bit better. But yeah, we'll see. So first, a little bit of an intro. BRICS member is PPP terms, 38% of the world, definitely larger than G7 at the moment. It is unorthodox, the BRICS, I mean, in a sense, doesn't have a secretariat like Bu Lili mentioned, right? The cost to join BRICS isn't so big, right? Because they don't have secretariat, they don't have really anything that bind strongly, in a sense. And to my last point about entering the dragon layers outside of the West influence, China in BRICS is larger than US in G7 right now. So, of course, BRICS says it's all, consensus, but I mean, this is just a hard fact, right? You can't just get away from this number, that they will do something if they need to. By they, I mean China. So yeah, export and import. Bu Lili also showed this in earlier. Indonesia have a good relationship with BRICS members, of course, because some of them are like really China and US, the West. So Indonesia is normally stand in the middle. But when we talk about trade balance, this is why the argument of export markets, to me, can be a little bit criticized, or at least mild, right? If all BRIC members, we aggregate their trade balance, it will be positive, right? That is, suppose BRICS tries to club together to avoid having to have big relationship with the US and the Western in general. They can't trade with themselves that much. Trading with themselves won't be that efficient, not efficient, won't be a clear way to do it, because as a whole, BRICS are positive trade balance. They export more as members to outside of the BRICS compared to buying from the outside of the BRICS, right? And really, if you look at the graph, it moves ups and downs, but it's really China, right? Look at the gold line on the right. It moves really with China. So the left is all BRICS members that Dr. Patundru mentioned. I just aggregate them together. And the right is the biggest countries in BRICS. Really only India that have a sustained deficit in trade balance, but you can't just, so suppose we want BRICS, so suppose BRICS member wants to sever ties from outside BRICS, mostly West, and then either the surplus needs to go down, or the deficit country needs to even more deficit than this, right? And of course, we know, for all Indonesianists, we all know that Indonesia is a little bit mercantilistic in their thinking, that this is exactly the reason why the export market argument comes up, right? Because we think we can export to BRICS easier when we join BRICS, while in reality, as you can see, BRICS members are all exporters, maybe apart from India. Net exporters, yeah, of course, both trade, two ways, but most of them are net exporters. So trying to be a net exporters, finding market in a club where mostly they are net exporters, to me sounds like it's probably not gonna work, probably, to say the least, right? So yeah, who's buying? That's the second question, right? And this is the next graph. Nothing for now at the moment. US is importing half of the world, right? If you want to cut ties with the US, it's impossible really to find other countries. Nobody buys like the US. So BRICS, to me, probably don't want to sever ties with the US, mainly because of this. If they want to do it, then it will come in the radical changes in relative prices, in the value chains, and a productivity shock, which is a lose-all situation. So if we talk about economic reasons to join BRICS or sever ties with the West, something like that, both will lose, like BRICS members and the US, because our relationship is that tight. So to me, even if, for example, Indonesia export a lot to China, for example, or other BRICS members, they will need another market to export their goods, right? Which is here ended up in the US. So of course, Bu Lili just showed us a great graph about Indonesia's low backward participation in the global value chain, because Indonesia's participation is really forward, right? Indonesia sells like a natural resource stuff that goes into manufacturing countries, and these manufacturing countries ended up selling it to the US. So if they lose their market, these manufacturing countries lose their market to US, they won't buy as much from Indonesia. So Indonesia will also lose their market. So even though Indonesia's export to US like something like 9%, a lot of Indonesian export go to US actually, just through these other manufacturing countries. So in aggregate, not exporting to US is probably going to be hard. That's the point of the export market argument. So Bu Lili, I think she's right when she said the GSP is one of the things that Indonesia shouldn't lose. And dealing with Trump is something unavoidable if we talk about that trade that I just mentioned. Okay, and yeah, it's probably the other way around, right? China has been diverting its export from US to Southeast Asia. So instead of Indonesia having more market, it's probably what happened will be the opposite. It is China, it is other net exporters that actually gonna export to Indonesia because they're kind of starting to lose a little bit market to the US, right? So it's kind of be the opposite. I'm not saying that it's always bad to have Chinese import, but the argument of finding export market then becomes a little bit more weak, right? And as I mentioned, even if we import more than China, we can still export to other places, just not BRICS. US is probably the biggest one. So yeah, I really believe what Bu Lili said, that Indonesia needs to still engage with the US and West in general when we talk about trade. Right, and so joining BRICS then becomes a little bit problematic if the US look at it and say, oh, I don't want to trade with you anymore because you know they're friends, right? Right at the moment where we actually need the US market even more after we join BRICS. So yeah, the gain is probably not there, but the risk is obviously Trump already said something like that, right? And trying to halt trade with BRICS. Sorry, that's not a very good situation and position which is having. We really need to talk to them about this. Next is probably the de-dollarization. This is probably something that you've seen quite often already, that the global reserve of central banks mainly US dollar, right? And while it's decreasing, it still seems to be far, far away from losing the dollar dominance. And Michael Pattis very convincingly mentioned about this, right? Where the USD won't get out, and lots of other people as well, right? USD will still have a strong position for a long time to come, mainly because reducing the reserve of dollars very quickly will be bad for both countries, both China and the US. So this will probably stay for a while, but the sanction argument to me still sounds quite okay, right? So having so much dollar kind of risk it being frozen if you try to mess with the US at the moment. And the alternative solution to that is in the interest of everyone, not just China, but also all countries that actually have that dollar in their balance sheet. The closest alternative in BRICS is CNY, right? Renminbi. But it requires China to lose its control over the renminbi, something that I'm kind of skeptical they will do, right? So they have to act like US, opening their market, accommodating the use of US dollar for everyone, not just their own people, not just for the US. It's probably something that China won't do. And as long as they don't do it, then dollar will stay and renminbi will never be the global reserve currency. So I think the closest possible alternative, either euro, which is also kind of a little bit skeptical, or just no global market currency. So we become like a normal trading, you know, a producer price or local pricing kind of exchange rate regime. Yeah, and also the next point is the US remains accommodative to the global saving needs. So they still absorb a lot of excess saving from other countries. So as long as they do that, as long as US have a current account deficit, then the use of dollars will still be there. So no matter with which countries we trade, under what currency we settle those trade, as long as the excess saving that we get from those trade is turned into US dollars to buy US asset, then we will still hold US dollars. And this is why I think this is what I think China won't do, right? Accommodating excess saving. So yeah, probably dollarization will stay, but alternative payment is still ongoing, right? It doesn't have to be a dollarization to have alternative to SWIFT. In fact, we already have some, and it is accessible for non-BRICS. So you don't have to join BRICS to use these systems. So again, even if we want to escape SWIFT, we can use other, you know, other system without even joining BRICS at all. So this isn't also the merit of joining BRICS, because it is in the interest of everyone that makes the system to have as much people to use it, right? So if you limit the use of alternative system only to BRICS members, you kind of shoot yourself in the foot because you want everyone to use it. So yeah, not a great idea to join BRICS, not a great reason to me, at least, to join BRICS. Next point is foreign aid. So tapping into the, you know, development infrastructure loan, soft loan, kind of like that. Yeah, lots of BRICS nations are actually net receiver of foreign aid. In fact, China is one of the largest until it switched into the BRI, like in the 2015-16, they start to throw out foreign aid to other countries. And Indonesia also sort of got reduced the blue line, the sky blue line, because they start paying out the loan they received, like the soft loan from the Western-led DAC donors, and start receiving the Chinese one, right? So looks like that. But again, NDB kind of small. Most of BRICS probably don't want to chip in the fund anyway. So yeah, apart from China, of course. So far, NDB's role is pretty small. So not so much people chipping in, not so much countries chipping in there. But for Indonesia also have this limit to borrow, right? So if you have a loan, that soft loan from DAC or non-DAC, you have to pick. Indonesia has to kind of pick which one they get because they have this limit, less than 40% debt accumulated, something like that, debt stock. So just because NDB give you more money doesn't mean Indonesia will receive it, because they then have to reject the West ones. So on aggregate, they still keep that 40% budget, 40% debt in line, right? So it's not like we're going to have plenty of foreign aid, something like that, so suddenly. I think Pierre van der Eng wrote quite nicely about this, that Indonesia switched to Chinese loans a little bit more compared to previous is mainly because Chinese loan focus on infrastructure development, while DAX focusing on poverty, health, all those kind of things. So if you're a leader that want infrastructure, but you don't care too much about poverty, about health, you can cut aid to this area a little bit, the MDGs, and receive more on infrastructure. So this is probably the reason why. And again, you don't have to be a BRICS members to get this. NDB doesn't require you to be a BRICS member to use it. So again, not a great not a great reason to join BRICS. So yeah, conclusion. A lot of reasons that was given to join BRICS to me seems to not okay-ish. We can of course discuss about this. But it's also, even if it's true, you probably don't have to join BRICS, but it risks unnecessarily cost of decouple from the other nations that don't like us joining BRICS, right? So the benefit isn't really looking as big, but the risk is there the moment you join. Most of the economic argument for joining BRICS, this is what I just said, sorry guys. Many observers note the need for a platform where Indonesia can have a larger role, which is not West-led. But is this platform not other-led? This remains to be seen, right? I'm not saying that China is gonna tell us to do what they want. No, of course, they haven't do it, in fact. So this is not warranted, this argument. But still, it is a possibility, right? And lastly, Indonesia was famous for, conducting the Bandung conference on the non-aligned movement. Where are these Indonesians? Why we suddenly join this, join that? Where, like I said, we probably don't need to join it to get the benefit. So this is something we can talk about, whether you guys, everyone that's here, entertain the idea of Indonesia starting again the non-aligned movement. But again, this is not economics probably, so I won't talk about it even more. But to me, the bigger issue really is the US-China rivalry. This is much bigger than BRICS to me, right? In fact, the reasoning, this is the exact reasoning why China want BRICS. Both has little, China and US has little economic incentive to decouple. But yeah, this is what I'm afraid of, right? This is a lose-lose situation for us prisoner's dilemma people who knows prisoner's dilemma, the game theory. A lose-lose, it seems to be the equilibrium that we don't want happening, right? But if security, in economic terms, of course, because I said decoupling is bad for both, either in the trade in assets, trade in goods. China will hurt, US will hurt. But if one can hurt themselves less than hurt others, they probably will do it when, the argument is no longer economic. So this is what I scared a little bit. When the argument is now security, politics, economic costs probably will be something that people are willing to bear, right? Which is always a bad, outcome for welfare and stuff. And US is now isolating itself, not just from BRICS, but also from its allies. And the reciprocal tariffs, Deb also mentioned about this, is a radical proposition and really, really scary. But now for sure, there may be a vacuum in the global leadership. So if US really assaulting itself, then we don't know who will take its place. We don't know whether we can take its place. Like the Deb point about WTO was, yeah, I think it hits the spot, right? Where with WTO members seems to cannot really work on a solution when the US, its biggest donor, left. Right now, who's going to take its place? It's not clear. We don't understand what the global orders look like. But as a good Indonesian, of course, everyone says the current president is more internationally focused. We can take a leadership role in its platform. We're the bangsa besar kind of thing, right? But if, as a good and reasonable, sensible Indonesian, I think it's kind of wise to acknowledge that where is Indonesia's position in the world, right? Are we really well equipped to take a leading role as economic wise? I don't think so. Maybe not that big of a deal. But this is also something that political scientists, international relation people need to entertain. But at least in ASEAN, Indonesia is really large, right? It will have influence in ASEAN, but it really should act like a true leader if it wants to lead ASEAN. And lastly, I really want to entertain the idea of a possibility of Japan filling this role, at least in the region. In lots of events, I think this idea has been thrown out, where Japan is really the one that is trusted by ASEAN people, like ASEAN leaders. So ASEAN don't really like US that much, probably not China too, but Japan is like, everyone loves Japan to some degree, right? Can Japan step in if all else fail is something I also want to entertain. So would love to have a discussion on that side. This is a couple of stuff that I read. Sorry if I'm a little bit too long, but that's all I can say. Thank you, Dr. Patendra. Back to you.
Well, thank you very much, Krishna, for yet another very comprehensive presentation with great details. I see some questions already. I see Dr. Desi Pane has four questions. So rather than reading them all, maybe I can just invite Dr. Desi Pane if she likes to address her questions directly. Desi, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Pak
Okay.
Acho.
Thank you.
Hi, Bu Lili, Pak Krisna, and everyone. Thank you for the very interesting discussion. I have some question for Ibu Lili and Pak Krisna. I actually already put in the question in the chat. Ibu Lili, you mentioned that Indonesia potential sectors include the shipping industry, railway, and others. However, if we check, actually, this industry remain underdeveloped, meaning that Indonesia currently lacks of the necessary capacity in terms of the skills, efficiencies, infrastructure. So what makes you confident that these sectors are viable for Indonesia in the near future? What strategies should be prioritized to build competitiveness in these sectors? And also, I agree with both of you that emerging economies are gaining prominence in terms of GDP, trade, population compared to G7 countries. However, if we look to the trade data, Indonesia trade relationship with BRICS remains resource driven, with Indonesia export primarily on the natural commodities such as the coal, CPO, nickel ores, wood, and others. And also, if we discuss about the trade data with BRICS, it's actually only with the China and India, not with other BRICS countries. So, in your view, does joining BRICS risk and reinforcing Indonesia's role as a more supplier of raw materials rather than enabling its transition toward higher value export? If we compare with Indonesia export to OECD countries, for example, Indonesia export are more diversified to more industrial products. And do you mind if I continue to other question, Pak Acho?
No, go ahead, Desi. Thank you.
Okay. Perhaps Indonesia potential accession to BRICS is not a problem. However, the process of the joining OECD and undertaking the reforms should remain the government's main priority. But I'm concerned that when the government shift their focus to BRICS, it might divert their attention from the long-term agenda of reform. How do we see the dynamic playing out? How can Indonesia ensure that BRICS membership align with rather than distract from its broader reform agenda? For example, how to make sure that Indonesia can also pursue its aims to shift to be greener and concerned to sustainability issues if Indonesia focus on the BRICS. And also the last question is about the de-dollarization that Krisna already discussed. How do you assess the potential benefits and risks of this shift for Indonesia? Would de-dollarization enhance Indonesia economic resilience, or could it introduce new problems, particularly in terms of financial stability and investor confidence? Thank you so much for the nice discussion and for the answers.
Thank you, Ibu Desi. Let's start with Ibu Lili.
Thank you so much, Ibu Desi, for highlighting very important issues. One, on the potential sectors that have multiplier effects for Indonesia's developments. Do I have any kind of confidence? Probably, to be honest, not. But should we start? I think if we don't start now, we will be losing a lot of opportunities. That's why I understand you're from National Planning Agency, so I think it's very important to have National Planning Agency back to its role, having long-term development plan. Because what I'm representing Indonesian people. We don't want our resources to be allocated and reallocated based on president's cabinet agenda. We don't want it will be directed by political party agenda. We want to be directed for the benefit for Indonesian's economy. And that's something that we need to start. Why we have learned on this shipping industry, Indonesia in archipelago country, we have 17 to 122 islands. Look at what the boat shipping industries that we have right now. So I think that's something that Indonesia needs to start working on that. On railway, look at our railway systems, look at the traffic that we have, look at the cost of traffic that we have, right? And look at the costs of Indonesia's middle income class. We spend more than 40% of our income on commuting, on oil, on cars, right? So we basically cannot save our expenses or allocate our expenses for healthy food for our family or for good educations. We spend so much on buying cars, on oils, right? So that's something that if we don't work together as Indonesia, as a society, we're gonna lose so many opportunities in the long term. And semiconductors and digitals, these industries are kind of the upcoming industries for the next 20, 30, probably 50 years from now. So if we don't work right now, we're gonna lose the boat. Fisheries and seafood products, Indonesia has a huge potential. That's something that we have never been really work on that. The fifth one, renewable energy. Has any of you been to the western part of the eastern part of Indonesia? We have 5 suns in Papua, right? So we have so many potential in renewable energy. If we still rely on coal and oils and natural resource intensive again and again and again, Indonesia has been, how old are we now? 75 years? If we look at our top exported products since 1960 until now, the story is about the same. The top 9 products back to 1960, the top 50 products now are all about resource-intensive products. So I think we really need to work, like I trust many of us are representing officials, academics, we really need to work together. What are goods for Indonesia? Not become very shallow and directed ourselves for specific interests for only specific parties or people or community. The second point on the de-dollarizations, I think the analogy is simple. When we realize now that we rely too much on China as import sources, right? It's the same with the dollarizations, because I think not only Indonesia, ASEAN, all other developing countries in the world, 86% of trade financing has been dominated by dollar. 86%. China renminbi dominating only 2%, now increased to 4%, euro dominating 6%. So it's simply all about dollar. Even without the de-dollarizations initiative, I think Indonesia, ASEAN countries, and other developing countries, they have started to work on using more local currency other than dollar. So I think this is just kind of diversification efforts, both in terms of import sources. We try to diversify our market and imports, not only rely on China, but at the same time, we also don't want to count a lot or too much on the on dollar. So I think we're doing the right track. It's not like we're choosing one to another. I think it's just very important for us that we need to diversify our export and imports, as well as our trade financing systems. Thank you so much, Bu Desi.
Thank you, Bu Lili. Over to Pak Krisna.
Yes, Pak Acho. So yeah, great question. I think Bu Lili's five sectors are great because we really need to learn from that, right? Like, vis-a-vis natural resources, there's not really a lot of human capital embedded in it, right? So of course, we have to have a look, but I do believe that the point is not really too much on the sector itself, but on the consistency of the policy, right? So just pick one and stick with that plan. Don't change in the middle of like 2 years, 3 years. So that one I think I like it. But onto the de-dollarization question, I think, right? So I think Indonesia, in a sense, is fine. They're not so much embedded in the dollarization question because Indonesia's current account is not that huge compared to China. Like China saves a lot, both the government and its SOEs and its people in the US asset, whereas Indonesia is relatively small, so it doesn't really have a big impact over there, as long as, like Bu Lili mentioned as well, we use different currency for important stuff like oil and the BBM, oil, fuel, and food that we do import a lot, and we have to generate enough reserve to buy those stuff, those most important stuff, and it's probably cheaper than making it ourselves, like swasembada anyway. One of the reasons why I don't think the de-dollarization will happen is because China's still doing it, right? They're still sending their money to US, and US still keep receiving money. So you cannot tell everyone to stop sending money to US, like buying US asset. As long as US keep their asset market open, people will come. As long as people believe in the USD, people will come. So the dollarization probably will never happen. Unless something big, something ugly happened, right? Just like I said. In terms of to Indonesia, I don't think it will matter too much as long as those trade that we do are converted and sort of balanced, instead of doing like what China do, right? Sending lots of their excess saving abroad. Of course, then Indonesia also have to improve its investing capacity. Like we have to gather a strong yield, nice macroeconomic conditions, so people want to put the money here instead of in the US. So yeah, I think that's pretty much that Bu Desi asked to me, right? I hope it answered your question.
Thank you, Krisna. I think while we are at the issue of the dollarization, I will just relate that to a question by Fahri, who asked if the mandatory de-dollarization affect the trade number. Well, first of all, I don't think it's mandatory. And even if they want it to be mandatory, they cannot afford to do that. And if I may add to this issue, I think the dollarization is really a long game for the reasons that was explained by Ibu Lili and Pak Krisna. And also, first of all, the renminbi is not fully convertible, right? So that's the most obvious reason why other countries, business players don't want to do the dollarization. And also one of the biggest countries in the BRICS, Brazil, for example, one of their biggest multinational corporations, Vale, for example, it issues its debt completely in US dollar. So don't worry about the dollarization. But for if anything, I think the dollarization risk will come from US itself, right?
Exactly.
By its own policy. In the Biden administration, they weaponized the dollar by, for example, cutting Russia out from SWIFT system, and now continuing with Trump bullying other countries. So probably it will come naturally to US, but not from BRICS. So that's just additional footnote to good
Yes,
presentation
Pacho,
by
maybe
Krisna and
add a little
Lili.
bit more, because
Go ahead.
NDB and RBI also disburse their loan in US dollars. So even China don't want to
Exactly.
de-dollarize.
Right.
So yeah,
Okay,
it's
let's
not
thank you,
mandatory, like you
Krisna.
said.
Let's move on. I think there is a question from Ibu Teti Simamora. Let me read it. Thanks for the presentation. It's worth pointing out that BRICS is not a formal organization yet. Unlike ASEAN and or ACD, it does not require domestic ratification by member countries, and there is no secretariat, as Ibu Lili said, and there are no dues. Therefore, members can come and go, so BRICS cannot really be compared with OECD. Maybe the better comparison is the Gerakan non-bloc, non-aligned movement. Oh, Krisna mentioned this. So the cost is negligible in the grand scheme of things. So question for Ibu Lili from Ibu Teti is, what has been the response of our trade partners, especially Japan, about Indonesia joining BRICS, if any? Lili, you have information?
Well, probably I'm not the right person to respond because I don't know Japanese policy. But just for our information, if we see Japan's role in Indonesia, both in terms of trade and investments, Japan's contributions to Indonesia's FDI and trade has been declining. If we see from 1990s, there was during Japan's peak era. So like Japan's foreign direct ratio of foreign direct investments like decreased from around 35% now to only 8%. It's the same with Japan's trade in Indonesia. So it declines from around 88% in 1990s to now only around 7.6% in 2024. So that's number one, that this is the fact that Japan's role in Indonesia's economy has been declining both in terms of trade, foreign direct investments, as well as lately infrastructure and digital developments. It has been overtaken by China, South Korea, and other Southeast Asian countries. Second point is that I really want to challenge Dr. Gupta in the sense like when you mentioned Japan is the most trustworthy of ASEAN countries. That's something that I don't know. Is it really true? Is it really just an image? Is it really just perceptions? That's something that we really need to ask ourselves. Who is our trustworthy partner? I think there's nothing other than ourselves. So, but and also we need to be very careful when we are reading surveys. Who is financing the surveys? Who are the sample? Who are giving the arguments? Who are giving the their point of view of contributing to the samples? So I think we need to be very mindful in terms of trustworthy partners. In the current situations, I think we should not really rely ourselves to other countries. I mean, it's very important for us to have constructive engagements. It's important for us for not putting protectionist measures. It is important for us to facilitate our industries and MSMEs to grow. But at the same time, we need to be very cautious on other countries' policies because I think like they have their own agenda, they have their own policy, and they do it on behalf or for the sake of their domestic voters. So I think we also need to be very mindful in implementing our policy to keep good and positive engagements. But at the same time, we need to do our homework. We need to do our domestic reform if we want to facilitate our producers to grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Lili. Yeah, I was also intrigued by Krisna's point about that last statement about Japan's standing in the economy. So I would extend that challenge from Ibu Lili to Pak Krisna. But also I want to push further to Ibu Lili on Ibu Desi's point about pushing for domestic reform, right? So if I understand the points made by Ibu Desi is that we still have a lot of agenda for domestic reform. And so why not use this, for example, OECD with very strict guidelines and things like that to push for domestic reforms? What came to my mind is the example of China itself, right? When they joined WTO. When they first started expressing their intention to join WTO, nobody believed that would happen. Communist country, very, very, very close, and how can they join WTO with all these requirements? But they did it. They did so many reforms. They open up and see what is the result now. So can Indonesia use these very strict guidelines, very strict requirements in joining OECD as a way to push for domestic reforms? What do you think? So, but before Ibu Lili, let's go to Pak Krisna first.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I mean, I heard that from a survey. So the slide I will put the Japan thing, right? I will put the source in the slide, which I will share to Lydia. So everyone can judge whether it's a meritable survey or not. But of course, when I say we love Japan, it's not like we love Japan. Like comparatively speaking, right? We probably okay with them, but we not very okay with the other two. But anyway, the reason why I brought it up is because Lili mentioned about the need for we work as an ASEAN. Is it in this or in the previous panel? I forgot, Lili. I see so much, kind of forgot. But yeah, like we need to work together. That's my point, right? And if nobody wants to fill in the bill, then who's gonna, right? So I'm not sure whether Indonesia can step in because all the efficiency stuff happening around, we don't really have money to give out to like a global organization. So who's gonna fill in if Trump get out, right? That's our biggest donor in all this Western-led institution. But anyway, the previous question that I want to, but thanks for entertaining Japan, right? I think at least we need to talk about it. But yeah, I think I want to point out a little bit from Buteti before, right? Indeed, I agree with you that entering BRICS probably don't mean anything because we can just get out. There's nothing to bind us. But Trump don't care, right? He don't probably want to know. We can't say to him that, oh, come on, we just join BRICS just for fun. We ain't gonna do anything to you. Probably not gonna happen. While joining BRICS doesn't really give us anything at all, it probably risks us, having some image from the US. So I guess at least what we can do is to talk to them, and this probably kind of move on to the other question, talking about how we can still export to US with Trump. But I probably go to Bu Lili first. I also want to hear about the answer to Pak Acho's question.
Over to you, Bu Lili.
Thank you, Dr. Patundro, Dr. Gupta. And thank you so much for highlighting these issues, Ibu Desi Pane. I totally agree with you in terms like when I put the pros joining OECD, I think OECD can provide us guidelines in terms of reforms, as well as to adopt best international practices in trade, tax, labor, environment, and the overall economic agenda. And I also would like to highlight, I agree with Dr. Gupta this time. How about the benefit? Will BRICS gonna give us benefits? Will OECD gonna give us benefits? Will be joining OECD gonna ensure us we gonna attract FDI? That's our aim. But will it really happen? Will Indonesia be really rich? Will GDP per capita of Indonesia really increase once Indonesia joining OECD? Will Indonesia increase trade and investments when Indonesia is joining ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, joining ASEAN +1 Free Trade Agreement, joining RCEP? The answer is no. Those are commitments. The answers is depend on Indonesia, how much Indonesia is committed to do the reform, right? And I totally agree with Dr. Acho in the sense that look at China. When China joined in WTO, this is the homework for Indonesia. China did all the reform. It took China at least 6 years with the very massive reforms for the last 4 years before China joined in the WTO in January 2001. It took only 2 years for South Korea. So if Indonesia want to learn, Indonesia can learn from South Korea to joining OECD. It took only 2 years for South Korea. They did all the reform, all the necessary reform before South Korea joined OECD, right? So the homework is really on us, how much we are committed to the reform. Because joining any kind of bloc will not gonna guarantee that Indonesia will become rich. It's not gonna guarantee Indonesia will increase our investments, trade, GDP per capita, none. Unless if we are committed to the reform, unless if we optimize the use of free trade agreements, RCEP, and other comprehensive economic partnerships. It's really depend on us, right? And the second point I would like to make is that this is a simple observation. Indonesia has trade share with 9 BRICS countries. Our trade shares is 38%. Indonesia's trade share with 38 OECD countries is 34%. That's just a simple observations in terms of how much importance joining BRICS or OECDs. And the third point I would like to make is that I want to, when Dr. Gupta is challenging that joining BRIC might not really provide any significant benefits, I totally agree. But again, let me quote Larry Summers, the finance ministers during Bill Clinton's. He mentions that a developing country, when they talk to China, they got an airport. When they talk to the US, they got a lecture. So this is very pragmatic solutions. And as I started in the beginning, whether the US like it or the West like it or not, this is the fact that emerging economies led by China, South Korea, India, has been growing significantly for the last 50 years. And the trend will be the same for the next 50, 70 years. Whether the US, the West like it or not, we cannot deny the role of the growing China in the economy, both in terms of economy, trade, investments, as well as infrastructure. The next question is whether China will be another or a kind of trying to compete with the US. I think this is really kind of the US paranoid of being a hegemonic country. I totally agree with Dr. Acho Patundru. What the US is doing right now with its all protectionist measures is just so very wrong, and it's actually shooting the US itself. Whether the US can pretend its hegemonic power, whether the US like it, the US and the West like it or not, I think they should admit it, the growing potential and the growing roles of Asian, China, South Korea, India, as well as Southeast Asian countries and other part of developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Lili. And I hope that also answer questions from Win Adela. I think it's quite similar question. So let's move to the next question by Arizal Jang Nanihan. And this is to Dr. Gupta. Since you mentioned that US market is irrepressible, how could Indonesia export more to the US market while Trump's trade policy currently aims to reduce US trade imbalance? Indonesia has contributed to US trade deficit of over 10 billion US dollar annually over the past decade, and the prospect of a US-Indonesia FTA is so far nowhere to be seen. Any comment on that, Krisna?
Yes, sure, Pato. So let me start by saying, yes. Also, previously there was a question about the whether BRICS will help world trade, right? So as we established that BRICS at the moment has no like a binding agreement, trade with BRICS members are still using, you know, ACFTA, and those like what we already have right now. So yeah, and what about the US? I totally agree. US is shooting itself in the foot right now. And what scared me the most is they will say, oh, that's fine, as long as I can contain China, then shooting myself in the foot will probably something that I will bear. So this is why I said this is a lose-lose situation for economists, because we think that with all these measures, the global GDP will kind of shrink up, if not a lot, right? For everyone, including the US. So to me, this is really a dark times for us economists. But the conversation has to be conducted by those guys that Lili mentioned about US is probably, you know, hallucinating about China trying to take its place as a hegemon or something like that. Also not a great place for us. But if the US still receive money from other countries, still continues with its current account deficit, it will import. So Trump's quest to reduce the imbalance generally, right, to reduce the current account deficit probably will fail. This is also the reason why Musk mentioned about cutting 2 trillion USD from the budget, right? Because 2 trillion USD is more or less the current account deficit projected will happen in the US this year. So if Musk can cut that, then they become surplus. That was the idea. But of course, cutting that large amount means that probably they will hurt themselves, shooting themselves in the foot, which I probably think they won't. Because then the politician has to tell their constituencies, right? Or I'm gonna cut this budget, this. So you're gonna suffer a little bit. They probably don't wanna. So they will import. That's my point, right? As long as they keep, you know, borrowing money from the rest of the world, as long as people still chipping into the US financial market, they will import. Now, the question is how we become one of the countries that actually help with that, right? Exporting to the US. And the reform that we all talk about that Bu Lili mentioned is the key, really, right? We know that US, they like it or not, they will have a deficit unless they want to shoot themselves in the head this time. And Indonesia should be able to benefit from that by, you know, all the domestic reform that Bu Lili mentioned, because Bu Desi just told us earlier that lots of things that we export to the US are manufacturing goods, whereas things that we export to China is the natural resources. China makes stuff, then they sell to the US. Why don't we, you know, make those stuff that US buy ourselves in our land, using our resources, stuff like that. So again, without reform, we can't do this. As long as we keep sending, you know, natural resources, then we probably kind of cursed by it. So the question is not whether US will stop buying, they will still buy. The question is, can we actually be the one they buy from? And there's no other answer but the reform that we already discussed.
On the last point, Krishna, if I may add, but what about the I mean, US has these conditionalities on having FTA with other countries in their IRA, in their CIPS Act. They want to have some consideration of countries of concern, right?
Yes.
So they don't want to give you access to trade if you deal too much with China, for example.
Yeah.
And then we have a lot of Chinese investment in our, say, smelters for the nickel processing. So how do you see this? We want to have access to US market, but at the same time, we have a lot of Chinese investment in our economy that makes the US is reluctant to give us even that mini FTA for nickel.
Yeah, excellent question. So I guess, yeah, it's probably the pain point in our diplomacy, right? Like, if US think we have too much ties with China, they will probably do something about it. But this is where the reform that we needed, right? We need more diverse FDI, not just from China, but the smelter that we already have, then it's hard to sell it to the US. But if they cannot buy it from us with that argument, they will buy it from somewhere else with probably more expensive amount of money. The point being, US will always buy stuff as long as they keep their capital account open. Now, how Indonesia can benefit from that? Yeah, probably one of the way to do that is to divert the, Chinese, a lot of Chinese content to other places, including China, obviously, or build something else. So Hausman mentioned about the problem with our downstreaming, right? That we start from nickel and then processing it to the downstream. Vis-a-vis upstreaming, we start with the assembly and then go upstream from there. Now, we probably need to do something like this, right? Something that required other expertise. Lili also mentioned about the FDI that comes to ASEAN are coming from China and the US, both of them. It's just the US don't come to Indonesia by quite a lot, right? They come to Singapore, Malaysia, something like that. So while the two nations sending FDI to the region, the region don't accept them equally, if that makes sense, right? So this is what we need, some diversion, like why not in Batam, why you go to Johor, stuff like that, because we need these type of FDI, stuff that actually we can sell to US and all the reform stuff. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. Okay.
It's a tough one. So yeah.
Thanks, Krisna. Ibu Lili, you have any other additional comment?
Thank you, Pacho, for your very interesting questions. Let me highlight two things. One is that for those who are not economists or do not have economic background, when we see trade deficits, this is economics 101, saving minus investments equal to export minus imports. So for an economy like the US that has high investments, it will be automatically running trade deficits. The way that Trump is using trade deficits for hitting their counterparts, I think it's just he is pure politician. He needs the public enemy to be hit. That's why in the first administrations, he make alliance to hit China together with the US and US partners, right? So it's just the strategy. There's nothing wrong with China. There's nothing wrong with the growing Southeast Asia. It's just the way that the US try to hit country. In dealing with the US, Dr. Acho, I think Trump is it used tariff not as a trade policy, not as a trade instrument. It uses as a threat for transactional economy that's gonna benefit, not the US economy, that's gonna benefit its supporters. And Trump supporters consist of at least 5 sectors. First, oil and gas. Second, military sector. Third, financial sectors. Fourth, pharmaceutical. And the last one is digital. The second administrations, because by constitutional law, this is the last term for him, he's gonna do all out, anything. That's why in these administrations, he attacked all countries, not only China. And at the end, will Trump gonna really impose tariffs? He's gonna use his for transactional. So for all tariff or for all countries, particularly countries that they have interest for the benefits of their business, they're gonna do negotiations at the end of the day. What can they benefit if they lift up these tariff rates? So that's basically we're gonna face for the next 5 years. I was involved when I was in the government. I was involved in the negotiations of GSP review. That's why I know exactly how it works, because Trump administrations, they're really gonna ask transactionally, literally transactionally, sector by sector, firm by firms. So this is something that Indonesia should not just talk, but really need to prepare. For example, Starlink in Indonesia, you know, kind of the sectors that have us direct connections for Trump administrations. That's something that Indonesia should prepare. When and also, like, for example, now Trump is also putting sections 232 on the tariff rates on steel and aluminum. We can use the argument Lion Air is the largest buyer for the Boeing. So over the 95 years of Boeing, since Boeing established, Lion Air is the largest buyer. So this is kind of something that Indonesia's government should prepare. Really need to go through transactions by transactions, which are that has the interest of Trump supporters. And we need to do it transactionally. We don't have any choices. That's just the way Trump and his team is doing.
Well, thank you so much, Ibu Lili and Pak Krisna. We only have 2 more minutes, so I think, and there is no more question. Let me check again one more time. Yeah. Oh, there was just a question about material. Of course, this is recorded, and we will. I hope Ibu Lili and Pak Krisna don't mind if we put it later in our website and also with the slides. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone. Yeah, there's no more questions. Thank you so much for your attending this Zoom webinar. We will have others to come. And also, I would like to thank Indonesia Project team that make this happen, Catherine, Lydia, Sarah, Intan, Flori, and Javier. And we hope to see you again next time. But again, the biggest thanks to Pak Krisna and Ibu Lili and Ing. Thank you so much, and see you next time. But before that, probably Ibu Lydia has some announcements, so I give it over back to Ibu Lydia.
Thank you, Pak Acho. Just a note that next week we will have another global seminar. I'll share that information on the screen. Otherwise, good evening, everyone, and see you on our next events. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ibu Lili, Pak
Thank
Krisna.
you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much. Learn a lot.
Thank you.
It was fun. Bye.